I had children at that point, and my eldest daughter had a autoimmune condition, which I realise now why it had come about in the first place, probably a lot of toxicity. And we couldn't get any help. The choices that we were given just didn't sort of make sense then. So I started looking into alternatives and was very skeptical of homeopathy, very, very skeptical. The nutritionist we were seeing at the time sort of suggested trying homeopathy. And I read about homeopathy by a doctor that happened to be a proper doctor, but she was also a homeopath. And I went to see her, and I was still really skeptical even after we were given remedies. But what I saw when I gave my daughter the remedy, the instant reaction, and my daughter didn't even know she had it because I put it in her water. So there was no placebo. It was mind blowing. I was like, what on earth is this reaction that she's just had to this homeopathy, which allegedly has nothing in it? So I signed up to study for 4 years and left my job, my old corporate world behind, and totally changed my life in many areas. Homeopathy is just the beginning.
And we're live! So excited to be back. First Being Human podcast of 2025. And we're going to get this year started with a bang with Lisa Strbac. She's a fellow Brit. And I was saying before we came on, so many of my guests are Americans, love Americans, but it's awesome to have a Brit on the show. She's the author of several books, but the two I've got with me today and that I've leafed through: The Homeopath in Your Hand and Tissue Salts Rediscovered. So she's an author, she's a homeopath, she's also a podcaster herself. So Lisa, very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. Honoured to be your first guest of 2025, and excited to chat about homeopathy.
Yeah, great. And it's something I know very little about, which I was just reflecting actually before we sort of got going, that I've been in and around alternative health for years, and obviously we hear this term a lot, but I've never read a book on it. I certainly don't have any understanding of it. So I'm so excited to be able to share some of the basics with people in this episode. And I also learned before we came on, we're both former employees of Deloitte. For people who don't know what Deloitte is, it's a big firm of accounting and management consultants. So we've both come from a very corporate background and ended up, in quite sort of different with different interests. So that's great that we've got that in common. Well, like with all my guests, should we just start from the start, give people a potted history, your childhood, where you grew up? I'd love to know a little bit of your background.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I grew up in a very non-alternative background. So I was conventionally raised and in West Sussex. My father's Serbian. I traveled a lot. My dad lived abroad in Indonesia, so I traveled to see him, and went to university, did everything, right by the book. So I went to UCL, got a really good degree, then became an accountant, typically just sort of in the matrix, so to speak, and got my job at Deloitte, was there for 12 years in corporate tax, and then went in-house. And while I was working, it's still within corporate tax, doing tax though for startups, I had children at that point, and my eldest daughter had a autoimmune condition, which I realise now why it had come about in the first place, probably a lot of toxicity, and we couldn't get any help even from Great Ormond Street. The choices that we were given just didn't sort of make sense then. So I started looking into alternatives and was very skeptical of homeopathy, very, very skeptical. I went down the nutrition route, the biomed doctors, the functional doctors, still sort of within the normal sort of main, still relatively not that different from sort of allopathic medicine. But in desperation, I saw...
For people who haven't heard that term before, what do we mean by allopathic
Western medicine? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. That's what we call it. Allopathic medicine is Western, sort of more conventional medicine. And I was, even that wasn't helping enough. And the nutritionist we were seeing at the time sort of suggested trying homeopathy. And I read about homeopathy by a doctor that happened to be a proper doctor, but she was also a homeopath. And I went to see her. And I was still really skeptical, even after we were given remedies. I can talk you through more a bit later. But what I saw when I gave my daughter the remedy, the instant reaction, and my daughter didn't even know she had it because I put it in her water. So there was no placebo. It was mind blowing. I was like, what on earth is this reaction that she's just had to this homeopathy, which allegedly has nothing in it. You know, if you go on Wikipedia, they give the most scathing review of homeopathy. And I was like, I've got to learn more because I was curious. So I signed up to study for 4 years and left my job, my old corporate world behind, and totally changed my life in many areas. You know, homeopathy was just the beginning. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. You know, I've come from a very normal background, so I understand people's skepticism. I wasn't raised in that way, you know, with lots of alternative remedies. So, you know, I was taking paracetamol and just, lemon sips, that's what I kind of knew of. So it is completely radically changed my life. And I really want to sort of help spread the word because, I know what it's like to sort of be looking for alternatives and not getting help with the, mainstream system.
Yeah. And well, just as you say that, there are two close family members of mine who are both suffering and both for whom Western medicine isn't having much of an impact. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be others in that position. So homeopathy. So yeah, can you sort of start with the basics of, what does the word mean and sort of perhaps build up from there?
Yeah, so homeopathy, I'll talk a little bit about how it was discovered. It means similar suffering, and it's the whole concept of like you is like, but I'll explain a little bit about that. So it was discovered over 200 years ago by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. He was a German doctor. He was actually very disillusioned back then with the medical practices which was going on. There was bloodletting and they used mercury, So he was doing he actually was working as a translator, as a medical translator. And while he was translating, he came across some information about the drug Peruvian bark, which is used or was used at that time as a cure for malaria. And it said that it was effective because it had astringent properties. And it didn't make sense to him because he was like, well, in that case, lots of herbs that have astringent properties should work, but they don't. So
what are astringent properties? What does that mean?
Astringent, actually, I'll have to look that up, what his definition was of that. But he, being a curious kind of guy, what he decided to do, we don't quite know what triggered this in his mind. Yeah. He decided to take the Peruvian bark to see what would happen. And what happened is he got symptoms of malaria. And he thought, this is interesting. This is a cure for malaria if you have those symptoms. But if you don't have those symptoms, it gives you malaria symptoms. So he then decided, he thought, right, is there a way to make this Peruvian bark more diluted? So it's less toxic, but it still has beneficial effects. So this is where he came up with the concept of potentization, which is how homeopathic remedies are made, which I'll talk through in a sec. But what he found was when he diluted the Peruvian bark, it was still as effective if you had the symptoms, but actually it didn't have toxicity or toxic properties. So this was the concept of like you is like. And he'd started discovering with lots of other substances, he would see what would happen if a healthy person took them, what symptoms it would produce. And then he discovered that actually, if you had those symptoms, it would cure you. So what he did, this is where homeopathy is kind of ridiculed by mainstream modern scientists, is so you take one part of the original substance. So let's take this example of Peruvian bark. You take one part of Peruvian bark, you mix it to 99 parts of liquid, and then you succuss it, which means shaking it. And it sounds a bit woo-woo, I know, but you have to do that succussion. They say it kind of releases the energy. Now that gives you a 1C potency. So C is the centesimal scale. So it's been mixed 1 to 99 parts. And then what happens is you take another 1 part of that 1C solution and you mix it to another 99 parts and you succuss it.
Right.
And you do that again. That gets you to a 2C. Now, by the time it's gone through that process 12 times to give you a 12C, There's no material substance left. So if you look at it under a microscope, you cannot see the original substance. And what happens in most homeopathy kits that you will buy for home use or over the counter, they come in a 30C. So they have been through that process 30 times. So modern Western medicine scientists will say can't work because there's nothing in it. If we look at it under a microscope, we can't see any of the original substance. But what we're finding is that, there's a new framework emerging of perhaps how things may work, and that homeopathy isn't based on chemistry, it's based on physics. We look at the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto that he's done on water, what we see with Veda Austin. She's a water researcher, and she's showing that water can imprint and hold energy, and it can change its patterns. So there's something going on here with these remedies holding frequency and having the water being able to hold some energetic imprint. And I think it's that modern science hasn't caught up with understanding exactly the mechanism, although there is a lot more research coming out. I'm not necessarily the person to give you all the research. The Homeopathic Research Institute, HRI, has loads of information on the science behind homeopathy. Dr. Luc Montagnier, he's sadly passed away now, but he was a scientist. He won the Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. And he did a lot of work showing that water could be imprinted. So he did studies showing that the HIV or DNA could basically be transferred via water into a totally different location. There's amazing videos on YouTube, and there's documentaries on that. So there is a lot of emerging evidence on it and how it may work. But I just want to sort of put that out there, because people often dismiss it and say, well, there's no chemical substance in it. And it's like, well, that is the whole point. Homeopathy is not a material chemical based medicine. And because it comes in pill forms, because when we've diluted it and succussed it and have that liquid in whatever potency we want it, say a 30C, we then get these sugar pills and we impregnate them with the liquid. So those sugar pills are just a carrier for the energy of that original substance. And that's, I think, because it comes in a pill form, people think that it should be like a material chemical medicine. And that is where I think the misunderstanding often comes. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, like very high level.
Thank you. And when you were talking about imprinting in water, we've had Gerald Pollack on the show who wrote the 4 Phase of Water, right? And he's done a lot of this research into the information carrying properties of water. And absolutely, as you say, there doesn't have to be physical material in that water in order for the water to carry the information.
Exactly. You've summed it up there. And because I think people don't realize that step with homeopathy, that it is made in liquid and water, but the pills are literally that carrier. And the work that he's doing is incredible, definitely ties into where, homeopathy, how it potentially works.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's a good way of saying it, the science catching up. There's a tiny minority of scientists looking into these properties of water, isn't there? But they do exist, and they do have great evidence to show that these properties exist. And as you say, Osterweiden is doing it from an artistic perspective, and some of her work is just extraordinary.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing.
How we can imprint our intentions and imagination into water, and then see the water hold it. Wow. Okay. So homeopathy, and from what I understood as well, reading this book, there's something happened in about 1910. So it had some momentum, right, in the early part of the 1900s, and then it sort of lost some of the momentum. Is that right?
Absolutely. So homeopathy was huge. Like, we can't underestimate how big it was a few 200 years ago. And most doctors were homeopaths as well. But in 1910, the Flexner report was published, which looked to standardize, or as they would say, enhance the quality of the medical system. And this is probably a whole podcast in itself, like the whole Flexner report. But as a result, homeopathy was basically, doctors could no longer practice homeopathy. They weren't allowed to be medical doctors as a result of the Flexner report. And the Flexner report branded homeopathy and lots of natural alternatives. I don't even like the word alternatives, but the natural original healing modalities like acupuncture, chiropractor, all of those modalities as quackery. That term actually came from the Flexner report. And so essentially, there were over 100, I can't remember the exact figures actually, but there were hundreds of homeopathic pharmacies and medical schools. Some of the big medical schools were homeopathy schools in the US. But after the Flexner report, it made it almost impossible if doctors wanted to be proper doctors with the medical association. They were no longer allowed to practice homeopathy. So in some ways, it's amazing that homeopathy has actually survived. And it survived because it works and because people, when they see the results, like what I had, I was a total skeptic. When you see it working, it's the truth, and it can't, like, the truth resonates. And when you see that the profound healing that can happen, you become curious and you start looking into more. But yeah, homeopathy was huge, and the Flexner report changed everything. Now, there's various, people have various thoughts about the Flexner report. It was in part funded by Rockefeller, and he obviously had his, he needed, I think people often say, to find all the petroleum and other things that he was doing to find ways to make money out of that. So they obviously went into the modern pharmaceutical industries. Whether that's conspiracy at all, is people need to look into that. But there is a whole, the Flexner report and the history around it and the motives behind it, that there's a lot to research. And interestingly, even Rockefeller had his own homeopath. He's allegedly quoted as saying homeopathy is an aggressive and progressive step in medicine.
Aggressive and progressive, right?
And the royal family, they've used homeopathy for years. Their primary physician used homeopathy as well. The Queen had a homeopathy kit. King Charles is a huge proponent of homeopathy and is actually the patron of the Faculty of Homeopathy. So it is something that is used widely, just not talked about necessarily in the mainstream press.
Right. Yes. Because I even, and I've been in and around sort of alternative health for, I suppose well over a decade now. And even I still have this slightly, I can just feel it in my body, this slight, just tremor of tension when I use the word, right? Even now. And there's so much baggage with the word, isn't there?
There is. And, I think I was really grateful in some ways for COVID and 2020, because prior to then, a lot of homeopaths wouldn't if you asked, what do you do? It'd be like, I'm a homeopath. Because there is this natural, it really triggers people. It's like, it can't work. There's nothing in it. And actually, that whole time period gave people, the health system was broken. You couldn't get a doctor's appointment. People were looking for alternatives. And homeopathy is one of the things that you can use quite easily at home for everyday illnesses and acutes. Yes, you should always work with a homeopath for chronic issues. But a lot of chronic issues arise because acute issues have been suppressed, or we've used toxic substances, we haven't enabled the body to express what it needs to, and we've driven those symptoms back in deeper. And ultimately, a lot of chronic health issues are a build-up of suppression and toxicity, toxic overload. So I think we could change the trajectory of people's health if we knew how to use homeopathy for basic things. Certainly, from my own perspective, raising my children, my eldest daughter, who I knew no different when she was younger. All I knew of was Calpol. I used to give her Calpol for fevers and for teething, because I didn't, there was nothing else that I knew of. And then when she had ear infections and tonsillitis, the doctors would give antibiotics because, again, there was nothing, I didn't know of anything else. And actually, every time she would have those, she would sort of, it regressed slightly after. She'd get ear infections more frequently. It wasn't curing her, the antibiotics.
Right.
And that helped build up to this picture of, an autoimmune condition. And the thing is, I could have used homeopathy had I known about it. I could have used it so easily for her teething or for fevers or for colds and earaches. And that's why, like, where my passion is to get people to just open their mind up to start using it for these things, because it could change the trajectory of people's health in the longer term.
Yeah, fascinating. Because we probably been through, probably a vat's worth of cowpole. My kids are both 7 now, but they had plenty of cowpole growing up. I mean, they're both very healthy, but just for things like that, it was just what we did,
Well,
right? And
people don't know any different. I used to go through so much cowpole for my eldest. My youngest daughter has never had cowpole because I discovered homeopathy. And people used to go to me, like, when I was still sort of in the matrix, so to speak. I was still in my corporate job, but I was studying homeopathy. And, I talked to the other parents at school and they'd be like, oh, give them blah, blah, cowpole. If I said, oh, she had toothache or teething or earache. And I'd be like, no. They're like, well, what do you do? Like, that's what parents, they're like, what do you do if you don't have cowpole? Use homeopathy. And it's amazing.
well, maybe we've sparked people's interest with that then. So but for common kid stuff then, what would be a typical homeopathic remedy?
Okay, so this is where homeopathy needs a little bit of, knowledge, and does need a bit of investment on your part in terms of like getting familiar. It's not difficult, but it's not like, it doesn't work in the conventional system. So in the conventional system, we get a diagnosis or a label. It's a fever or it's a ear infection or it's teething, and then we apply the related drug to treat the label. With homeopathy, we're always treating the individual, always, even in acutes. So this whole like you as like, we need to know what symptoms the individual has, and then match it with the remedy that is most similar. And with kids' issues, predominantly there aren't loads of remedies. I mean, there are 8,000 homeopathic remedies.
8,000.
Yeah,
Wow.
so there's loads, but then like a decent homeopathy kit might have like 36 remedies in. Some of them have 18, and you can still like cover most health issues with 18 remedies. So if you learn just those 18 remedies, you're going to be in good standing. But like, for example, I'll give you a little flavor. So aconite, the homeopathic remedy aconite, is probably one that I use the most often. And it's got this energy of it about sort of sudden kind of fevers. It's quite instant, sort of the reaction. It can be used for panic attacks and anxiety, because panic attacks are like come out of nowhere quite often. It's great for nipping colds in the bud or for anything which comes on quite suddenly. Then there's belladonna, which is quite similar to aconite, but it's got a lot more redness. So quite often, if you think of kids that have, these fevers that come on or any issues and they're like got bright red faces, then that suggests they might need belladonna. These remedies do have a lot more to them. And it's why I wrote my book, because it explains, what it might look like if someone's in an aconite type state versus belladonna. You've got chamomilla.
Great names, by the way.
They are, well,
I'm already sold.
We'd use the original Latin name. So belladonna is deadly nightshade.
Okay.
And it means, belladonna means pretty woman, because it's because quite often with belladonna, you might find these kids they have, or even adults, they have dilated pupils. And that's a typical sort of keynote of belladonna. Aconite is from monkshood. Is it monkshood? I have to double check. Sometimes we need to double check. So, but I talk through aconite. And I'll just show actually. Yeah, it is monkshood. So like there, I would sort of break into, easy to use.
Yeah, I have to say the book's very accessible for anybody who is getting interested in the book.
They are great names, aren't they? But chamomilla, so we call these the ABC remedies because they are used so frequently. So A, aconite, B, belladonna, C, chamomilla is all about, it's one of the number one remedies for teething and colic, but it's got this really angry energy to it. So think of like that, screaming baby that's teething.
Yeah,
and, as when you're holding the baby, it always makes you feel on edge because you're kind of picking up on that anger. And quite often with chamomilla, it's like they're impossible to please. It's like they want to be carried everywhere, but they don't want to be looked at. they ask for things, but then you make what they want and then they refuse what you've given them. It's very good, but you can see the picture for toddlers. They can very easily go into this chamomilla state. So they're just 3 remedies, but just having those 3 alone, I could go on forever talking about my top remedies, but you can see that they've all got slightly different pictures, and then actually just to illustrate another remedy, which I couldn't be without, particularly for my youngest daughter, pulsatilla. I take this a lot as an adult, but this is all quite needy. Like when people get ill and they get quite clingy, they need lots of affection, very different from chamomilla, and they can be quite weepy and, think of like this gunkiness. So they might have the green, like snot trails. That's more pulsatilla. And these remedies could be used for any health issue. It just depends how the person is presenting. So if a child came on with something really suddenly and were bright red, you'd think belladonna. If this child actually had like this thick green snot and suddenly, went all clingy, a bit of separation anxiety, pulsatilla. Or if they like suddenly really angry, then chamomilla. So you're matching the remedy to like what state that person is in at that time. And so it is a different, people ask me all the time, on Instagram, oh, Lisa, what's the best remedy for X issue? And it's like, no, what's the person like with that issue? That's what we're trying to do.
Fascinating. So it's not just the immediate physical symptoms, it's tuning into a sense of their energetic state, and that helps you make the selection.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite different, isn't it? But on one hand, they're different, but then, all parents, have some ability to be, I'm in tune at some level with, my kid's energetic state. It's not sort of beyond the abilities of people in general, right?
No, it's really straightforward. I teach in my books, I explain this on courses about how a method we can use to try and extract symptoms. So do you want me to explain?
Go for it.
Yeah, so I use the acronym HEALS. So what we want to do. So HEALS stands for helps or hinders. So you want to look what helps or hinders that person in that state, like when they're ill. So are they helped by fresh air? That's going to be like quite pulsatilla. Or are they hindered by fresh air? So you can think, right, what helps or hinders that person? Like, do they feel better, after being outside, or do they want warmth? Then E is event that caused it. Now, that we don't always know this, but this is really important in homeopathy. We want to know what was happening at that time the person got sick, because things are very rarely random. Normally, something happened to trigger. So quite often, people could have maybe a shock and then they get ill. So that shock could be aconite. That's a big shock remedy. It might be gelsenium, which is also not feeling well after a fright. Or could it be that they were out in a cold wind? Now, these things, they sound a bit bonkers, but this is just through clinical sort of observation where these remedies, we've noted that they have this affinity. So aconite, quite often people that have been out in a cold wind. So imagine like the person that often says, oh, don't get your ears, cover your ears when you're out in a cold draft or a wind so you don't come down with an ear infection. That is like typical aconite picture. So we can, maybe someone had a grief or, something that there could be anything that has happened that's sort of out of the ordinary that's triggered that person to suddenly get ill. And so that we want to know because homeopathic remedies have affinities to these events. And then, so that's E for event that caused it. A is accompanying symptoms. So what else is going on as well as the main complaint? So someone might have an ear infection, but actually what else is going on? Are they clingy? Are they weepy? Is their right arm hurting? The more strange, rare and peculiar we call them, the better, because the more we're going to be able to fine tune a remedy that matches. We want to know those really weird things that are unique to you. And then L is location, like where. And sometimes people will go, oh, well, it moves around, it goes from the left to the right, or it goes up to down. And that, again, certain remedies have keynotes. So we have remedies that are very much left-sided remedies or right-sided or changeable even. And then S is for sensation. So is it like a stabbing pain or a dull pain or what kind of sensation? So those help us. We want like 3 to 5 symptoms So we don't need loads, but that heals can be used to help us extract symptoms, particularly like for a baby or even an animal where they can't talk. We can observe, they're better when they're being carried. Oh, they're worse when I put them down. We can observe, and then we look to see which remedy is the best match for those 3 to 5 symptoms. So that's for acute or everyday illnesses. For chronic stuff, long-term stuff, we want to work with a homeopath. But for for acute issues, it isn't that difficult. It's just getting your head around the change, because it's so different from just picking up Calpol or going to the doctors and having antibiotics. It creates a whole mindset shift.
Right. And if I wanted to invest in one of these kits, what's the typical cost of one of these kits to have at home? I mean,
so they're cheap. This is the thing. They're cheap. So like in the scheme of things, so my first kit that I bought was £30 and it had 18 remedies in, and I've still got that now. You can buy the refills for about £3. You can have kits that have hundreds of remedies in that are much more of an investment, or, just to start with a basic one. But you could start with 3 remedies, say aconite, arnica, and belladonna, and they'd be about £5 each for a big tube that would last you a long time. So
we've definitely spent more than that on Calpol.
Exactly. Homeopathy's cheap, really cheap,
Yeah, that's interesting. And with a small investment, maybe a couple of books or a few courses or something, you could become proficient in using a kit like that.
Yeah, I mean, the kits, like there's various kits out there, but nearly all of them come with a little booklet, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Like I remember I bought my first kit. It's a blue one. It's well known from Helios. It had 18 remedies in. I think I spent around £25 at the time.
Yeah.
And that was enough to see me through like most issues. It was only then like after a year, maybe a few months, 6 months. I mean, I had little children, baby and a 4 or 5-year-old at the time. So they're always getting it sick. And that saw me through most things. And then I was like, oh, well, actually, I think this remedy might have been better, but I don't have that. Then I invested in a bigger kit and, then suddenly I had loads of remedies. But that's enough to get you started, without a doubt.
Yeah, fascinating. And we sort of touched into it here, but up to you how far you want to go down this rabbit hole. But you were talking about events and conditions that may trigger a particular symptom and so on. And that starts to touch in, for me at least, into the terrain theory idea, right? That a lot of the time we don't get sick because, some bug has jumped from one person to another, but it's because we've been exposed to some environmental change. And what we're experiencing as symptoms is merely our body adapting to a change in conditions, if I've got that right as a summary of terrain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, sorry.
Go on. So, I suppose, what's your understanding of terrain and how does it play into homeopathy?
Yeah, so what you've said about terrain is my understanding is agrees. And so I'm not a terrain theory expert, but I'll give my perspective. I have looked into it, and I follow a lot of terrain theorists and their work and love what they do, and how it sort of plays into homeopathy as well. So yeah, I don't believe you necessarily catch a bug in the way that we've been told. I do think that there can be energetic transfer go on, because I certainly know that when I'm around someone that is sick, I can get symptoms. But seeing it in a family situation, that doesn't happen to everyone. So there's some kind of resonance there. Like, do you need to get sick? Do you need to detox? Has your toxic load built up? Are you susceptible to what they've got? So I agree with that. I also think, there's different, I love it. You can approach it from so many different angles, because then you've got like the whole, I don't know how much you've looked into, it's the German new medicine perspective.
With Dr. Lisa Strbac, yes.
Yeah. So which will say actually almost all disease is of like a mental origin. If there's a shock or a trauma, then your body will create physical symptoms, which is actually the healing process. I think I've sort of summed that up. But I think it can be honestly a bit of everything, in the sense that, like, I've certainly seen, without a shadow of a doubt, emotional and mental shocks create illness. But I also know that deficiencies and things, like if I'm nutrient deficient, then I'm also going to get symptoms. So like that's where stuff like tissue salts or, sometimes supplements we need. So again, looking after the terrain, making sure our body's working optimally. But I also know that there are toxins out there that when I'm exposed to, I will get sick, which the German new medicine I'm not sure how much it explains everything, because it doesn't necessarily always explain that, sometimes if I'm exposed to loads and loads of toxins, I am going to get sick. Well, the terrain theory obviously explains that. But like with homeopathy, what I always start off like on my courses, saying is we can look at the different types of symptoms. So like think about first aid symptoms or emergency type situations. It doesn't matter how strong our terrain is. If we walk into a knife and cut ourselves, we're all going to bleed, like no matter what. Like that's just, if I get run over, like I'm going to like have symptoms. If sometimes the external, that's obviously really obvious, but sometimes the external force, there's an external stressor that is so strong. It doesn't matter how good my terrain is or how good my mind is, it is going to like impact me and give me symptoms. Like, and there's obviously a scale and a continuum where that stops. But homeopathy will work for that because, I will give myself remedies to match what symptoms I have and it will help heal. And then we've got like those acute situations like sore throats or ear infections or flu symptoms where I would say actually, like that's when our body needs to detox, we'll get those symptoms. And if we're really looking after our terrain, but we're not susceptible as well to, to these illnesses, we won't get them. And if we are susceptible, then we will. And then homeopathy, we can treat for that. And then I see it like we've got the chronic issues where it can be a buildup of toxicity or, and I love the way a particular homeopath explains this, it can be the body. It's just kind of got stuck. It's got this stuck in this energetic state. So Dr. Rajan Sankaran, who's an amazing Indian homeopath, and he talks about this. He says, let me see if I can remember this rightly, but he talks about how the body, when we've got chronic issues, it's when we're acting in a disproportionate or inappropriate way. So give an example of someone that was, say, in a war-torn country, they're in an adrenalized state, it's an appropriate response. They're having to get ready to perhaps flee. So that's appropriate. But after they've got out that situation, say they're in safety, years later, they're still in that state. It's like their energy has got stuck and they need a remedy to help move them out of that, because there's no reason at that point that they should still be in that state. And those sort of patterns can even be passed down from parent to child. Even like if the parents aren't in a particularly great state at conception, we can pass that down. So homeopathy, we talk about those as being like a miasmatic. We call it miasmatic, but it means we inherit it. So I feel like homeopathy can explain all of it, but not sort of saying it's not this or it's not just that. It kind of appreciates all these different modalities and viewpoints, and has a solution for it. But I'm biased, I love homeopathy. I'm like, it can literally, there's not much it can't deal with. Even
well, that's interesting. That's a good question. In your experience so far, where has it fallen short? Is there anything you've discovered it has not worked for?
It doesn't work, right? So it doesn't work when people have this. There can be various issues. So obviously, it can't help you regrow a limb, but it can still, even the person with some really serious pathology going on, it can still help to some extent, even if it can't bring sort of complete cure. But where it doesn't generally work, I find it's where there are maintaining causes. So if people come along wanting a magic pill, and this is say for more chronic stuff that's going on longer term, and yet they are in a toxic relationship or they absolutely hate their job and it's like soul destroying, homeopathy might give you the awareness, like, oh shit, this is really bad, I need to change my life. But if you can't take those steps to get rid of that maintaining cause, then you're not going to return to full health. So
it can't sort of overpower, external circumstances in
No,
that way. It can't give you like some kind of special shield, right?
No, because homeopathy is always just triggering self-healing. We have this amazing ability to self-heal. Homeopathy is triggering the energy within us to stimulate that self-healing. Like
Yeah.
as you know, it's got nothing chemical in it. So it's working on that energetic basis. But sometimes our external factors are such that we can't change them. And then we call that maintaining cause. Homeopathy can help like palliate those symptoms, but to get that real like cure. But I've seen it where I had one patient and she actually came, she had a huge fear of cancer to the point that she couldn't actually even tell me that in the first appointment. She didn't like her job, her life, it was all like very, very, very negative. But she came to me about this health anxiety. So I gave her a remedy, which is a really good match for her symptoms and for health anxiety. And it helped a bit. But then she came back and she was able to open up actually specifically about cancer. And she could then share more information. I was like, right, I know which remedy I need to give you now. Gave her that remedy. And this remedy is actually carcinosin. It's made from cancer. It's got the energetic imprint of cancer, which is all about suppression. And think about cancer, there's a lack of boundaries. So people that need this remedy often people please. They don't put themselves first. They think of everyone else. It's like the destruction of self. And it was amazing. She had the most incredible response to it. A fear of cancer went, but she actually changed her entire life. She left her job. It's like that remedy gave her the stimulus to go, do you know what? I'm not people pleasing. I am literally changing, everything. So that I think is where, you don't always see cure. I would say if people are heavily on medication,
I don't quite. So how is that an example of it not working?
Oh, well, no. That particular example, it did. But because she was able to, her life was able to support the change she needed to get through that. So it can give you the trigger to think, I want to change, but whether or not you can practically do that, I would say, if in that example, she couldn't have left her job, probably the health situation would have returned. So that's where I've seen people that, they don't perhaps want to do or can't do the bigger picture stuff. I think that's where we can find relapses. I've had it with like with children where they're perhaps really I don't want to sort of speak with any judgment, but really pushed by their parents, and then they develop symptoms of anxiety or OCD or quite severe mental issues. You can give them a remedy, and I've seen like the OCD or the anxiety go, but then perhaps the bigger picture of why they've got into that situation, the stress from the schooling or the stress that they're put under, that isn't dealt with, and then they relapse again, and that's where we might find that that it isn't, maintaining causes. There are some other issues, like have very heavily medicated people. Homeopathy can still work, but we sometimes find that the remedies being energetic, they're kind of like fighting against at the conventional drugs, which creates a layer. So it can be hard, but it's not to say you can't, but it just can make it more, more difficult, but you can obviously still see success. I'd say they're the main factors, to be honest.
Yeah, no, interesting. And this kind of goes back to where we started in terms of Dr. Hahnemann and his original discovery. So, and you used an example there of this particular remedy that has the qualities of cancer exposed to someone with a fear of cancer, and like creates the cure. But why is it? Why should it be if I'm exposed to the disease energetically, I can cure myself? Why is it?
Hahnemann said in his organon, which is like the Bible and all his writings, is that two diseases can't occupy the same space. So it has to kind of dissolve because you're putting this energetic imprinting. It's hard to explain it really, because I guess we don't quite have the full understanding and words to do it, because it is something that just isn't the way we think about health and disease. But he would say two similars just can't occupy the same space. And so you've got this physical disease, and if you put the energetic similar in, the vital force will heal itself. I often see it like, and actually perhaps this is branching out a little bit, but something that a lot of people aren't aware of, be explained in this sense. So homeopathy can be used really effectively to detox specific substances, which right now is very much needed. So if someone has never been well since a certain drug or medication or allopathic treatment.
Yeah.
And I'll explain this perhaps in a non-controversial way. Let's talk about the contraceptive pill. Someone could have the contraceptive pill and they could have taken it for years. They've stopped years ago, and their periods and their cycles have never returned back to normal. Like they're infertile perhaps, or they just have irregular cycles. There's no material substance left of that pill. It's gone. It left their body years ago.
Right.
But it still hasn't returned to normal. We can give, and you should always work with an experienced homeopath for this, because there's a particular order and it's part of a much bigger picture. But we can give a remedy made out of the contraceptive pill, so that it's just the energetic imprint of that contraceptive pill, and we can give it back to the body, and it almost sends like the vital force, which the vital force is like our immune system or our energy system or our chi prana, however you want to call it. It sends a message to say, look, this shouldn't be in me. This energetic imprint needs to go. It shines a light, because it's almost not aware it's there. It shines a light to say, this is here. Hey, you need to get rid of this. And that's one of the first talks I ever went to, done by the amazing Dr. Jane Donegan. She was the first homeopath I saw, and I went to a little talk she did on homeopathy, and she said it's like, imagine you're in a dark room and you're trying to, find the monster. You don't know what you're looking for. And the remedies kind of come in and they shine a spotlight so you can see, that's what it is. Now I can see, I can get rid of it. But until then, you're kind of fumbling around in the dark. So the detoxes, I think it can perhaps highlight a little bit more easily for us, because, we can understand, well, we've never been well since a certain substance. We take the homeopathic remedy made out of that substance, and the body goes, okay, this isn't meant to be here. And it's incredible, the results that we are seeing with homeopathic detox. It's just, there's a whole nother branch of homeopathy, but a lot of people just aren't aware. And I think it's so needed because of the amount of medications and toxins that people have ingested at some point.
Well, yeah, it's almost like every week in the news, there's another environmental toxin is highlighted. I mean, I was just thinking about it the other day. It's the paint in the walls, it's the cups that we drink from, it's the washing powder we wash our clothes in. We find them everywhere, right? And not to want to get people fearful about it, because that's the worst possible response. But it does appear to be, a fact that people continually are discovering toxins. Environmental toxins, really, in all aspects of our civilized existence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important not to become neurotic either, because, I think when you start out, I remember reading the book Toxic World, Toxic People, which was amazing. Right. I was like, oh my God, everything's killing me. From my baking trays to everything. And it can become overwhelming. And I think our bodies are designed to detox. There are certain things that obviously are worse than others. And just to try and do what we can and not get out of control and worrying, because that's the worst thing, as you say.
Yeah. It's the microplastics is the last one. I'm now terrified about I've got two boys, my kids' balls, how much microplastics are in my kids' testicles, already, right?
Well, do you know, you can do, I've done a plastics detox on my kids. So actually, and this is again where homeopathy, if you're worried about these things, because homeopathy doesn't have any side effects, it's not toxic. It can produce reactions, big detox reactions, but it's not toxic. So you could detox your kids from microplastics. And actually some homeopaths will say you should do that regularly. Also with the contraceptive pill, even for children and even for boys, it's in the water supply. So I've detoxed my girls from contraceptive pill that I took for years before I got pregnant. And actually, it's one of those things that we see beneficial to a lot of people and kids and even men, because it is in the water supply and, it's inherited. It's that energetic imprint is passed down.
Well, yeah, there is an infertility. Well, I don't want to think. You see, I'm always hesitant to use the language because I don't want to induce fear in myself or anybody else. But we know infertility, male fertility, and I'm not sure about, but certainly male fertility is at much lower levels. Sperm counts, testosterone counts, are at much lower levels.
If people are worried about or suffering with, issues, so it's not something I do personally, but there are homeopaths that specialize in the fertility, area. And one of my close friends, actually, and she's an amazing homeopath, like her results from using homeopathy for infertile couples, the results she gets are phenomenal. Like she had like an 80% success rate within the first few prescriptions. And these were people that were trying it like just before they went for IVF, or they've been having multiple rounds of IVF or been trying for years, and they've decided to just give homeopathy a go. And she uses remedies that matches their individual states, but she'll also detox contraceptives and antibiotics and steroids, the big sort of drugs that can really impact our whole immune system and well-being. And yeah, her success rate is incredible. So, but again, it's not something people know about. So it's definitely worth, if anyone's listening, looking into that further.
Fascinating. Now, we've talked about the fact that there's nothing left, right? It's just this energetic imprint in the solution that we then put in a sugar pill. And so we take that imprint as we ingest the sugar pill. Could we, in theory, and I'm thinking about the work of Eileen McCusick and the others that we've talked about, do away with the sugar pill, right? And just find ways to expose people to the frequency pattern and so we don't need pills anymore.
I'm so excited you've said this. You've only just become familiar with homeopathy. And you know what? That is something people normally think about maybe after, some time of using homeopathy. And this is like, I did an event last year in London, and I got various speakers to come and speak. And Alex Eck was talking about terrain theory, and I did a little talk on homeopathy, and that was basically my conclusion. And I referred to Eileen McCusick's work, just saying, look, and this is why I think it's not, I don't want to get conspiratorial, what have you said, like, if we realize that we don't actually need anything to heal, it makes us pretty powerful beings to have that understanding. So these remedies, they act as a carrier for this energetic imprint. And I think it's because they come in pill form that right now it is so accessible and people are open to it because we're used to taking our medicines in material form. But in that talk, I actually mentioned about Eileen McCusick's work and say, actually, for me, her work, her book, Electric Body, Electric Health, isn't it? She's incredible. Her work, I think, was the most similar to homeopathy. When I read it, I was like, she is talking about the same stuff that we talk about, but she's using a different modality. She's using the tuning forks, but ultimately it's doing the same thing. She even talks about the ancestral energetic imprint and which side it will appear on and how she can feel into it. Like with homeopathy, we give remedies to, to clear ancestral imprint. And a lot of where she says in the body that certain issues, like mental issues, will appear as physical symptoms, they correspond to our remedies. So you'll look the remedy up and I'm like, wow, she's talking about this particular mental issue can manifest as this physical symptom. And that's what we see with our remedies. So yes, absolutely. But I think that's a long way off because people are so for the masses, we're so used to consuming physical pills. But I think that is why as well, does the pharmaceutical industry want us knowing about homeopathy, cheap things that can't be patented, things that are so cheap, things that do actually help us heal, at a deep level. And ultimately opening our mind to the way the body works is not necessarily, as we've been told, that we can self-heal. So yeah, it's exciting times. And we're seeing that in some ways. You can get remedies made on frequency machines and frequency devices. And I find they work just as well as the remedies made.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
because there's this machine, I don't know if you're familiar with this, Spooky 2, I've seen people talk about, which is basically this, a frequency generator, and you sort of dial it in, and you don't even have to dial it. You can just put like a pill onto the machine, and it figures out the frequency of what's evident, and then it zaps you with that, right?
Yes, I'm not familiar with that specific machine, but I have two like frequency sort of type machines myself. So I've got a Suli remedy maker. This only makes homeopathic remedies, but basically you put the remedy in a little hole, you put, the pills in, and then you type in a rate. There's a little book it comes with, and for every homeopathic remedy, it has like a code, and you type that code in, and that then imprints the pills with that frequency.
So it's that way around. Okay,
so that works. I mean, I got that during lockdown when I was worried that I was going to find it difficult to get remedies because I wasn't sure if the pharmacies were going to be shut. So I thought, right, I'm going to buy one of these machines. I'm a bit skeptical, but whatever. I'll get one just to be better than having nothing. And I found at that time that whenever I made remedies, I was working out of another homeopath's clinic. And when I made remedies for my particular patients using her medicating potencies, her pills, they would get lost in the post. And then my patients would message me saying, oh, I haven't got the remedy. And I'd be like, right, well, now I have to do it on my machine because I couldn't get the actual physical remedy. And I had some of my best, it's like it happened on purpose to prove to me it worked. So I had a girl, a non-verbal autistic girl, 9 years old, start speaking with a remedy that was made on my machine. And I had like someone
Lisa,
that had, it was amazing. I had someone with thyroid issues that proven with a blood test. And I made the remedy that I wanted to give her on my machine. And she took it for like however many weeks. And then she had a blood test follow-up to show that it had returned to like normal. And I was like, so I had to have those experiences to prove to me that my machine worked because otherwise I just would have thought no. There's that. And then you can get home devices even. So I was really triggered. So I'd seen with interest on Instagram, people talking about the Healy, the little frequency device.
No,
you've seen them?
No,
I use it all the time. I've got it. I'm wearing it now. So it's like, it's this big.
There was somebody in my co-working space who was wandering around with one of those on, yeah.
So someone was sharing on Instagram and it gives frequencies. And I thought, oh, yeah, it looks good, but I don't like it. It's like direct marketing. No, you're just saying that because, you. And then someone shared about how it contains the frequencies of homeopathic remedies. There's a module. So I thought, I'm just going to get one.
Now you got my interest.
Yeah. I thought I'll send it back if I don't like, if it's like you can send it back free. And it runs a scan on your biofield. So again, like what Eileen McCusick does, it scans your biofield and then it will tell you the remedies that are the top 5 remedies that are the best match. And then you can literally send the remedies via the machine. And I honestly was so bowled over that it was like, if I ran it on my husband, it would be the remedies that would typically work for him. If I ran it for my daughters, it would be their remedies. And if I ran it for me, it would be mine. And because I've got enough experience as a homeopath, obviously you'll be able to validate. So I think you're right. I think things will be moving hugely into more frequency-based, perhaps, with equipment or devices, or even realizing we don't need anything.
That's where I was going to go next. Do we even need the frequency? Can we be our own frequency generators, right? Can we do our own scans and just using our body as an instrument, beam, whatever frequencies into whoever needs it?
I bet we can eventually, yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it, as well? I mean, the other thing where I'm still sort of undecided a little bit. So people particularly as well saying it's placebo. I'll give you an example. I had a really bad, actually I've had it a few times, headaches or UTI. I'll talk about a UTI I had. And I was convinced that this one remedy, you know, was going to work, and it did nothing. And then so it's not about intention either. Because I was like absolutely convinced this remedy was the one. And then the next remedy didn't work. And then the next remedy didn't work. And the next remedy didn't work. I was like, for God's sake, you know, this should be easy. Why aren't these remedies working? Actually, I needed to see my homeopath, because what I had been missing was an event that had caused the issue, because sometimes you lose sight. And I'd had a shock and a fright a few days before. And it was a fright that kind of triggered a grief reaction in me. So I needed a remedy that had that affinity to grief. So people that say about intention or it's placebo, or it's just the intention of the remedy, I'm like, it's not though, because you still, and this is where I'm still like, you know, developing my own thoughts on this. You have to still have the right remedy. It's still about that frequency and that match. So could we ultimately zap ourselves with remedies, like, and you know, with intention? Yeah, but you'd still have to find that right match. Otherwise it won't do anything.
Yeah, and part of the human condition is denial and avoidance, right? So unless we can become completely, you know, impervious to psychological denial, I guess it's going to be hard for us to always find what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, human nature just makes it hard, doesn't it, I think?
Yeah, interesting. What about non-local effects? So, I mean, Eileen talks about this, right? She can be pinging a healing, you know, her tuning fork in. In fact, she did it with me in the States, and I was in the UK, and I was getting this beneficial effect. So, are you seeing that? Is there an equivalent in homeopathy? You know, using these non-local effects?
So pure, like strictly with homeopathy, we should be giving the remedy, you know, in a pill form. But having said that, like particularly with these devices, so this is like, you know, the classical homeopaths will not like this. This is sort of straying out. But with the with the machine that I've talked about, where you put the pills in the little container and then put the number in and impregnate the pill, you can write someone's name, date of birth, where they are, and put it in there and send it to them via the quantum field. Now, like, I have to say, I am inherently a skeptic. That is my default position.
I wish, tax accountant, Lisa.
I know. I wish I wasn't such a skeptic, because you'll see homeopath that would answer this straight away is, yes, definitely. But like for me, I have to see it work, like again and again. Like I have to have these kind of almost like painful healing experiences to be able to prove to myself, okay, now I can see it works. So, and I've done that to people when they've asked me to, and they have said, yes, it definitely works. I had someone actually that was trapped in, during COVID. She was traveling, and I think she had to travel via a country to get somewhere else, and didn't have the right paperwork, and ended up like in a, you know, being in a cell, and it wasn't very nice. And she messaged me saying, can you send me some remedies? Like, because I'm feeling really shocked and I need some help. And she was obviously desperate, and I did. And she said it massively helped calm her down. Certainly with the Healy, that little device, yes, you can absolutely, you know, send remedies to people. And again, I'm skeptic, but then I hear like the quantum scientists talk about quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
And even Einstein called it spooky effect at a distance, which is why I think that particular device is called spooky.
Exactly, that's why it's called that.
Yeah, and I think, when I listen to these scientists talk about quantum entanglement, I'm like, yeah, it can definitely work from a distance. And one of the reasons I love Eileen McCusick so much is she's got that kind of skepticism. You know, she talks about someone asked her to do it remotely, right. And she was like, don't be ridiculous, I'll do it to prove it doesn't work. And she was like, shit, it does actually work. So yeah, I'm like on a very similar mindset to her, that I have to see it works, and I see it does, but I'm this part of me that's like, how does this work? But it does. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. You've done it with, you know, the name and the address, because it's like to tune in to the extent that this quantum field works. And I still actually haven't had. Yeah, I'm I suppose still a skeptic, a very open skeptic, I say, but somehow we need very little this to make the link right. It can just be a photo or a name and address, and somehow that's enough of a key to create this quantum connection, it appears, right? I find that fascinating.
That's what That's certainly like when I've done my sort of a training, with Healy, they've explained that you need, like the more information you've got, the better, but ideally a photo, the name and a date of birth, because that is all the information is out there in the information field. Everything that has ever been and ever was, everything is out there. It starts, with a thought, with the energy, and actually that's your pinpoint as to where to pinpoint that person or where it needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's. I find it extraordinary, this sort of place we're at right now, that technology enables this, that we're having this type of conversation, that what we're now exploring in terms of consciousness. It's I still find myself somewhat sort of not in shock isn't the wrong word, but I just find it extraordinary that I've gone, from just a few years ago to just being, another guy like with very conventional beliefs, to now talking about, non-local frequency healing. And it seems like just a few months, like people seem to be, I don't know.
I hear you. I'm laughing.
I'm sort of speechless that this now exists, right, as a phenomenon.
I'm laughing because, I totally agree with you. There are some days when I'm like, well, how did this happen? But then so many of us, like so many people are like this and looking for this as well. The people I run my courses to, they're all like they're all like, how did this happen? Like, but there is a mass, I don't like the word awakening, but there is something happening, like, change in consciousness, or just, there's a big shift. Whatever it is,
it is a big shift. And it's not like I was sort of wandering around Goa or in a sarong, meditating all the time. And now I've I've been doing a bit of yoga here and there, and I'm sort of meditate when on a good day. But I think there's something that appears to be beyond just sort of my own self-development somehow that's going on.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, absolutely with you. And it seems that way for so many people, that I follow and on social media or I listen to or respect. It just seems like that's the way for many people.
Yeah. 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 It's a fascinating time to be around, and how many normal, and then you think, oh, I'm the only, because you read the newspapers and so on, and then most, often my immediate circle, and I'm like, am I the only person? But then there's millions of people, right, who are sort of becoming familiar with these ideas.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many people that I wouldn't have thought are like that are open to it. Like I've had people, ex-colleagues from Deloitte, get in touch to say they want to look into homeopathy or whatever. And I thought, oh, that's good, because I thought you'd think I was a raving lunatic, or join some cult the way I've changed into, but it is actually, I think it's a lot more, many, many more people than we realise.
Yeah, maybe we should start the sort of Deloitte woo-woo club or something.
It is, it is really, it's great though. It is, but people need it, don't they? And actually, even I went into Boots for the first time. It's people that aren't in the UK. It's how would you explain what Boots is? Well,
that's a very conventional, pharmaceutical retail outlet, right? It's where you go and get your pills.
And beauty stuff, but
it's beauty very stuff. Yeah, I guess I would be. Yeah, for women, definitely a beauty stockist.
I went into Boots the other day. I needed to get some shampoo and conditioner. I was like, right, actually, I've run out. I just need to pop in, and I was actually pleasantly surprised, because I was like scouring the shelves to see, what do they have? Like they have now got some arnica, which is one of the top homeopathic remedies. They actually had aluminium-free deodorants. A lot of their shampoo and conditioner were natural ones. And I thought there was a few other things, but like they had Epsom bath salts. They had things that a few years ago, they had fluoride-free toothpaste and mouthwash. And they had like bamboo, toothbrushes, and the kids' Jack and Jill toothpaste. And I was like, this is actually a really interesting, encouraging shift, because 2 years ago or a few years ago, there was nothing like that, in somewhere like Boots. It was all just mainstream, toxic products. So I thought there is a shift happening, even like in the most mainstream of places, because if Boots is now selling aluminium-free deodorant and fluoride-free toothpaste, I thought there is definitely something is changing.
Well, you're right. Not just because Boots has necessarily become enlightened, although they might have done. It's because there must be an awful lot of demand, right? Because every centimetre of their shelf space, has to be carefully planned, right? And they wouldn't have a product there if it wasn't selling in high numbers. So.
Yeah. And the amount of probiotics, I was like, oh my God, this is actually overwhelming, because it was like probiotics for every single, like for, mental health, for this issue, for that issue. But, I would use probiotics years, like probably, 12, 13 years ago for my eldest daughter. And it was hard to get them back then. And now it's like, Boots, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of bloody probiotics that are here. So yeah, it all filters through eventually.
So 2027, we'll just go in there with our passport photo and stick it in one of their frequency generators, and the pharmacist will just dial up the frequencies.
I'm not, that would be amazing. I'm not. I think. Do you know what? You've just like really summed up the future of health. Perhaps without the ID bit, the electronic ID. But yeah, that is maybe where.
Yeah, who knows? It's a great time to be alive. I know you haven't got long left, but I realised we didn't really talk about the salts aspect. So I wonder if maybe it's a good time to bring it back down to back down to earth and talk about salt. So talk to me about tissue salts and their role in health.
Yes, so tissue salts. So I wrote this is a very little sort of easy to use book on tissue salts, but tissue salts are much more straightforward in some ways than homeopathy. Like, they're a great place if you're starting out, because there are 12 core tissue salts. So Schussler was a doctor. He was a homeopath originally, but he sort of now says tissue salts aren't anything to do with homeopathy. Or not now says, that's what he said towards the end of his life. But he discovered that when the human body returns to ashes, there remain 12 mineral salts. So, and he said that every single disease could be traced back to an imbalance in one of these 12 tissue salts. So there are, his followers have discovered more tissue salts, but these are the core ones. And really, if you can get to grips with these 12, now they do contain a very small material dose, because they generally come in 6x or 12x potency. So they're slightly different from homeopathic. So homeopathic are diluted 1 to 99, the centesimal C scale. Tissue salts are the X decimal scale, so it's 1 part to 9 parts. And they're actually triturated, which means we get the original substance and we grind it with lactose generally. And so they'll come in a 6x or a 12x. So they do contain a material dose, but it's very small, like still very, very small. They're not working just on a material basis. They're still working on an energetic. So like, we kind of say they're a bit of a hybrid between homeopathy and mineral supplements, because they're energetic, but they can be much more readily absorbed and have much sort of deeper impact than taking a material, pure sort of mineral supplement. So we can take them long term. So unlike with homeopathy, you always want to take the minimum dose and just take like less is more, because with homeopathy, because it's energetic, we want to stimulate that self-healing. So think of like turning a car in an ignition. Once it's started and running, we don't keep turning it. We can stall the progress. So that's with the analogy with homeopathy. But with tissue salts, because they do contain a material dose, we can take them longer term, and we can even take them for like chronic issues where, so we don't have to work with practitioners. So that's why I wanted to write the book, because people have so many questions. I talk about the differences between homeopathy and tissue salts, but also like the type of issues that you can treat. So there's almost like, nothing. We can take the tissue salts for pretty much most issues. There are some tissue salts that are like really handy to have at home, like ferrum phos is a great one for sort of nipping colds in the bud and sort of general immunity. Some people will choose to take it throughout like the winter seasons. There's tissue salts for, if you've got extra lots of sort of discharge, or you're more gunky, or perhaps you've got skin issues. or perhaps, you're going through growth spurts. So they've, again, got a particular picture, and there's only 12. So it's really easy to, I can read out if you want, like the 12, the type of things that they, so we've got, I'm just going to read it out from my summary. So we've got calc fleur, which is all about restoring elasticity and strengthening teeth and bones. And calc phos, which is about building nutrition and also bone health and bone growth and rehabilitate. So my husband had a cavity and he came back from the dentist, and I said, I was actually just learning about tissue salts at Homeopathy College at the time. And I said, oh, hang on, before you go, like have the filling done, just let's test you out. Let's put you on calc fleur and calc phos tissue salts over a couple of month period and delay going back. And when he went back, they couldn't find the cavity. So it had remineralized his tooth. So they're amazing. We got calc sulf, which is all about cleansing the blood, dissolving discharges, healing wounds, eliminating infections. And then ferrum phos, which I spoke about, the first aid remedy. So using first stage of illness. It's anti-inflammatory. It's also an oxygen transporter and really good for, any anemia or any issues like that. Calimure, which is a big decongestion detoxifier, like think about swollen glands, it cleanses lymph. Califos is great. It's a brain and nerve nutrient, so it can calm the nerves, help with fatigue. So if you're going through periods of overwork or stress or burnout, that's a great one. Calisulf is a skin conditioner, and late stage infections. Then we've got Magphos, which is amazing for cramps and relaxing nerves and muscles. So think any like growing pains or period pains or any sort of spasmodic type pains. And then we've got Natmure, which balances fluid. So you can use that for any watery discharges or dryness or dehydration. Natphos, amazing acid neutralizer. Like that is, if anyone is on any indigestion remedies or, that Natphos, like babies with reflux, I wish that Boots, there you go, Boots, if you want to make some money, get some Natphos and sell it instead of antacid or Rennies or whatever, because that is just amazing. And that sulf is one of our big liver support remedies, cleanses the liver, detoxifies. And then silica is sort of skin and tissue cleanser and conditioner. So you can use that to support teeth as well. It's good for hair loss. It's good for sort of skin. And then something else that's really interesting about tissue salts, and this, I'm not sure if you've come across him, Steve Faulkner. He was on my podcast a little while ago. He's actually one of my probably biggest ever downloaded episodes. So he might be interesting one if you want to explore tissue salts. He explains tissue salts unlike anyone else I've ever heard. And he talks about the Zodiac sign. Now, there are obviously 12 Zodiac signs and there's 12 tissue salts. And each tissue salt relates to a Zodiac sign. Now, I always thought when I'd heard about this, that sounds a bit like woo-woo. But he explains it like this, that when
And you're already several years into a homeopathic. So you're bar for woo-woo.
So he said the zodiacs, imagine it's not to do with your star sign, but your zodiac sign represents where, particular points in time at the year. Yeah. So he says when you are in your mother's womb, you're in there for 9 months of the year. She's inhaling the oxygen, and depending on what point, the sun will emit different frequencies depending on the time of the year. So if you've not been in the womb for 3 months, you basically haven't had that same development opportunity for those particular frequencies. And so you're lacking in those particular 3 tissue salts, specifically the one for your, actually the month that you were born. So I'm a Virgo, and my tissue salt is Calisulf, which is all about skin issues. And my area of susceptibility and weakness has always been eczema and skin issues. So I should be taking Calisulf because I'm basically deficient in that because I wasn't absorbing that during my gestation. And I looked at the tissue salts for my family, and it is spot on, their star sign as to what tissue salt relates to that and the health issues that they get. And then you get into the realms of medical astrology. And I was thinking every health practitioner should be looking actually when someone's born and then looking at the tissue salts, because you can almost guess what health issues that they're going to have. So I'll give you some examples. My husband's a Libra, which it relates to Nat Foss, which is all about the indigestion. Like he suffers from that, quite a bit. And it's all about acidity, bladder and kidneys. Then my eldest daughter, she's Taurus, and that's Sulf. But that's all about they're prone to issues of when it gets damp. And her health really suffers in the autumn during like mushroom season when it gets really damp. That's when she gets sick. So this year I put her on Nat Sulf, and I've got her on it all the time now. And she actually didn't get any like her seasonal issues that she'd normally get.
Interesting.
It is. And then just to finish off, like my youngest daughter, she is Gemini, and that's Callie Muir, and that's all about lungs and gunkiness. And she is like always had sort of more prone to chesty issues and like snotty and feeling congested. And again, like that relates to what Callie Muir will help. So I think that is an area which I just find so fascinating. And Steve Faulkner, I have to thank, because he was the one that I'd learned about the tissue salts and the Zodiac, and I kind of dismissed it a little bit. But when he explained it the way he explained it, I was like, okay, now I understand why. And now I'm going to try it. And yeah, it's so far, it seems to be helping us. So that's something to look at.
Well, it's obviously one of your great qualities is you get interested in something, you sort of absorb it, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to give this to the world. It's great.
I have to try it out for myself, before because I think it's that personal experience where you really, get to feel, what does this work? And then you can use yourself as a guinea pig and then start using it on others.
Awesome. Great. Okay. I know that we've got 3 minutes left, haven't we? So I just had one question, and then we'll definitely plug your course because I know it's closing tomorrow. But for people and this is a completely selfish question, right? So I'm in great health, right? I just don't have anything that I could point to that I'm. So for people who are in very good health or great health or whatever, and just like want something that may lift them even higher, is there anything that you recommend?
With homeopathy, I would say you only ever want to use it if you've got symptoms, like yours. So get some basic remedies, and if you feel yourself coming down with a cold or something, you could take aconite. You could still work with a home. I think health can always be improved. So you could choose to work with a homeopath for what we call constitutional treatment, where they're going to find the remedy that matches you, which is going to be easier for them to do if you're in great health, because there's probably less layers. So you could still do that to up level. And then in terms of tissue salts, have a look. Take yours. I'd recommend perhaps taking your Zodiac sign and maybe the one or two after, depending on, when you were born and if those resonate, because you might be lacking in those as well. But yeah, so I would say do that.
Great.
So it can still, see at work, do the constitution
with a homeopath, and then your Zodiac sign and one or two more for the. Great. Okay, so your course. So for people, we're on the 14th of January now for live. But what's that?
So it'll close tomorrow, but I will run it again later this year. And it's basically breaking down how to use homeopathy, right from the very beginning. So I created it because I remember when I was first using homeopathy, just thinking, oh my God, there's so much out there. There's so many books. Nothing broke it down the way I wanted. So this is like taking it from the start, like from why we get symptoms to the top remedies to have at home, how to find a match, why fevers actually aren't what we've necessarily been told to fear. Even the nice guidelines say that we shouldn't use antibiotic agents to lower fevers. So empowering parents as well. And then going into more in-depth homeopathy as well, how to find remedies, how to make your own remedies. So it's everything. And actually my book was based really off of my course. I did my course and then people asked, please do a book. My book, Homeopath in Your Hand, has 77 remedies in it, but it is really it's a very similar feel. And some people just really like to learn via that video format rather than reading.
Great. Okay, thank you, Lisa. I know we're at time, so really appreciate all of your time, sharing all of your wisdom and your stories. It's been great, and you've been so entertaining, which I love. So, and so there's that course. We'll put a link. We'll put a link directly to that. Maybe if they've missed this one, They can.
It will run again, like
They will
later.
run
Yeah.
again, yeah. And anywhere else you would send them, and we'll put the links to the books.
I would, in terms to learn more about homeopathy, connect with me on Instagram because I share so much information. Like there's so much free info on my Instagram page, which is just at Lisa Strbac. And then on my website, I've got freebies as well. So I've got a free 11 so frequent you ask questions and then top 11 remedies to have at home. So that's 33 pages. You can download that. I've got a longer free guide for mamas to be and new babies, which is over 70 pages, and the top remedies to have during pregnancy, childbirth. And yeah, so download those for free because that's a great place to start.
Okay. Thanks once again, Lisa. It's been awesome.
Thank
Really
you so
enjoyed it.
much. Thank you. Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.